Hello friends. Today we're going to talk about how to paint animals in motion. How can you overcome the fear and confusion about all the many things you need to keep in mind? I won't say it's super easy, or that there's some magic trick that will instantly unlock the ability to understand animal movement. But I'll share a method that can help you work through this challenge. From there, it's up to you, your willingness to explore this subject, and your dedication to painting beautiful pictures. As you'll see, it's really possible to capture animals in motion. It's not some fantasy or superhuman ability. It just requires consistent, creative effort and, importantly, exploration. So, we're going to use a horse as an example. What I recommend is this. You can see the finished drawing I've made, and I worked from a photograph. There are many animals you could study. Take tigers, cheetahs, or even dogs or domestic cats jumping and running, or birds. The first thing I recommend is to gather as many reference photos as you can if you've decided to paint an animal. If you can observe it in real life, even better. Do some quick sketches. But if you're only working from photos, gather as many as possible. You can even watch videos and make quick sketches based on them. The key here is to practice consistently, so your brain gets used to the structure of the animal's body. You'll start to understand how the legs move, how the head turns, and so on. Once you've chosen the animal you want to work with, for example, the horse in this case, I suggest searching online for information on its anatomy. Look up diagrams or illustrations of the skeleton and muscle structure. My process is that I first make a pencil sketch based on the photograph, just drawing what I see without worrying too much about the underlying anatomy. Of course, if you want to specialize in a particular animal, like becoming an expert at drawing horses, it would be helpful to study their anatomy in more depth, learning the names of the muscles and memorizing their structure. But if this is just one of many animals you plan to paint, it may not be necessary. Compare your sketch with an anatomy diagram of the animal, like the horse's muscle structure and skeleton, and check your own work. I've already added shading to this drawing and I'll explain that more in a moment. By comparing your drawing with the anatomy reference, you can start to understand where certain shadows and highlights come from. For instance, you might see shadows in the photograph but not immediately know what's causing them. At this point, it's also important to think about the movement of the horse. For example, in this drawing, the horse is pushing off with its back legs, while its front legs are raised, and the body and head are slightly turned. Turned here, the horse is likely pushing off with its back legs and turning at speed. This observation gives us another point to check. First, we see the horse's head might be slightly turned. For example, in the drawing, the nose is even slightly pointing in the direction of the turn. Another detail is the direction of the mane. If the horse is turning this way, the mane shouldn't be flying in the same direction. It should be blown backward due to inertia. Take your time to analyse the drawing, even if it takes a few hours over a couple of sessions. The next step I recommend while working in pencil is to establish the shadows. How to do that? First, identify the darkest areas. You already have a sense of where the animal's muscles are and how they're moving. Determine where the light source is. Is it coming from the right, the left, or above? Identify the darkest spots. In this case, it's under the belly and between the legs. Right here, you can immediately see, for instance, that the transitions between light and shadow might not be smooth. I figured out this muscle structure by studying anatomy, and without it, the transition might have looked softer, but adding that sharper change makes the drawing more realistic. Once you've figured out the lightest and darkest areas, you can gradually move on to working with watercolor. Your sketch will now guide you and make the painting process faster and more straightforward. You'll also avoid over-erasing and damaging your watercolor paper, which doesn't hold up well to excessive corrections. With all of this considered, you'll have a clearer understanding and be well on your way to creating a beautiful drawing. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's not something supernatural. It's just productive, step-by-step work. Now let's dive into the specifics of this drawing. Muscles, colours, tones. First, I start with the forms I understand. My paper is slightly larger, so I'll need to make the horse a bit smaller. The head is perpendicular and located about a third of the way down the page. The head takes on an elongated shape, and then I see the trapezoid shape of the chest muscle, which is slanted since the horse is moving to the side. I can connect this to the neck and draw the belly, which turns into a snowman shape for the body. Then I add the legs. Now that I've done this sketch, I can see that I've pushed the horse too far to one side, so I'll shift it slightly. It's important to pay attention to the animal's point of support and consider whether the animal is truly grounded in that spot in your drawing. My horse seems a bit off balance here. Of course, there's still the tail to add. Something still feels a little off in terms of positioning, so I may need to adjust the body proportions a bit. With this rough sketch, I'm now starting to refine the details of the horse. I'll continue paying close attention to proportions and go over them carefully, but I'm not adding light and shadow just yet. I'm still focusing on the outlines in pencil. Pay attention to the alignment of the eyes so they don't move up and down. They should follow a single line. I can already see that I've lifted this part a little too high. Here, you can clearly see the chest muscle, which is prominent in many photos. It might not technically be a chest muscle, but it resembles one. When you think of it as a chest muscle, its shape becomes clearer. Focus on the proportions of the legs and how they attach to the muscles. In this particular leg, it's not obvious because it extends backward. But here you can clearly see the chest muscle, and behind it is another muscle, followed by the shoulder-like area where the leg connects. Notice how the length of this leg matches the length of the horse's head. Pay attention to this. In humans, the distance from the elbow to the hand is roughly the same as the size of the head, and that rule can help you here too. Don't forget we're dealing with a complex perspective, which may not always be easy to grasp. This is where the photo comes in handy, allowing us to double-check. There are some interesting veins visible here, which we'll later bring out with colour. The horse's knees are also quite prominent, so take a close look at the angles there. The hoof of this leg, for instance, aligns with the knee of the front leg according to the photo. I'm shrinking the format a bit, which presents some challenges. Instinctively, I want to keep repeating the same forms, but I have to keep reducing them, and that doesn't always come easily. Bit by bit, the horse is taking shape. Once you've finished your drawing, take a moment to review it again. There's an interesting point here. The horse's back is hidden and you can almost immediately see the curve from the neck leading straight to the rump. Pay close attention to this. What you see here isn't the back anymore, but the horse's pelvis. You'll notice its rounded shape in the photo. Look carefully at where the horse is standing. the hoof should be positioned slightly lower than the raised hoof of the back leg. Another useful tip when drawing from photos is to consider not just the shape of the animal, but also the shape of the negative space around it. For example, with the legs, it's easier to determine their position by focusing on the surrounding empty space rather than the legs themselves. I estimate the shape of the negative space and try to replicate it. Don't forget to check the tail. The tail has a skeleton, so if you examine the anatomy of a horse, you'll see there's a stiff, bony structure in it. That's something worth showing here in this typical tail position. Now, as I look at my drawing, I feel that the head is a bit too large. I'll take a moment to adjust that. You should also carefully review your drawing before moving on to colour. Analyse your feelings and impressions, and we'll begin working with colour, friends. Thank you for watching this video. This video is part of my paid lessons, and you can get access to other lessons through Patreon. Thank you for your support. I also appreciate donations, and even if you're not ready to watch paid lessons but enjoy my videos and want to support the channel, you'll find all the ways to do so in the description below. Thank you, and don't forget to like and share with your friends. Now let's continue with the lesson. If you've already done a colour sketch, it'll be easier for you to figure out where the darkest and lightest areas are. If you haven't done one yet, I recommend doing it as it will save you time and calm your nerves during the colour selection phase. For the horse, I'll mostly be working on dry paper in a glazing technique. If you want to paint this white horse against a different background, I recommend studying photos closely and paying attention to the light and shadow on the horse. As I'm painting, you can see bright blue reflections. These are from the sky. The beautiful glow of the horse is justified by the sky and yellow sand in the composition. Yellow and blue always work well together. Now I'm filling in the background, wetting the paper as I go. If your paper dries too quickly and you're struggling to keep the background wet, try dividing it into two parts. Paint the sky separately from the ground. However, it's better to invest in good paper, ideally cotton-based. The one I'm using now is 200 Dream at 2, so it's thick enough to hold water for a longer period, allowing for wet-on-wet work. I'll approach the mane and tail with a smaller brush for more detail. As for the sky, it will be a gradient from bright blue fading into white. To achieve this, you can tilt the paper slightly so the pigment flows downward. If puddles form, gently blot them to avoid harsh lines. There's no distinct horizon line here. It fades into the distance. I'll do the same for the ground, but with a different colour. I'll add a darker shade under the horse's hooves to show dust rising. I'll take a darker tone to create this dust effect, and by adding a little water, we can form a light, airy cloud without making the background too heavy. Let the background dry completely before moving on to the horse to avoid any unwanted blending of colours. Now, as the background around the horse is drying, I'll start working on the colours of the horse itself. What colours will I use? Essentially, the horse will have just 3 colours: the blue from the sky. I'm using a mix of 2 blues, one darker, one lighter, black and sienna or any brown of your choice. It's better to darken it with black if needed. We'll be mixing these colours, and I'll start from the lightest tones, gradually moving toward the darker areas. I'll begin with the horse's face, dividing it into light and dark areas. The darkest part will be the nose and the eyes. On the horse's face, you'll notice some very subtle shadows with a bluish tint. These should be added gently and delicately, especially if your horse is drawn on a larger format, where you have space to blend. In my case, since I'm working on a smaller scale, blending too much would spread the colour over the entire face, so I'll leave it as a soft blue tone. I'll now switch to a small brush to work on the sharp details of the eyes. The nose also has its own soft, damp look, so I can extend the same colour there. If possible, leave some white space around the eyes to represent eyelashes and highlights. Even if there's not much room for highlights, the eyelashes will add some life to the horse's expression. Pay close attention to the contours of the face. The textured paper and smaller size I'm using aren't ideal for fine detail, but I wanted to experiment. If you're working on smoother paper and enjoy adding details, you can refer closely to your reference photo and build more precision into your drawing. My goal here is to keep the drawing simple and experiment with a looser style. The face is starting to take shape, and I'll add a few more details. Now I'll focus on the body's colours. The highlighted areas should remain light as this part is in shadow, but I'll leave some white spaces. Some areas will have cooler tones while others will lean warmer, blending with brown hues. Pay attention to these transitions to avoid missing any key shifts in tone. This is where I'll start blending. I'll apply the colour, rinse my brush, and soften the edges for smoother transitions. Every muscle is essentially a rounded or oval shape, so think of them as 3D forms, like spheres. As you find each muscle or shape, fill it with light and shadow. I'll also add some darker spots to areas like the knees, as horses often have subtle markings besides the main shadow and light areas. For now, I'll leave the front part as it is, though I might come back to refine it and move on to the back, which is mostly in shadow. This area will be more interesting, with alternating warm and cool tones. The best way to achieve this is with a wet-on-wet technique. However, I won't wet the entire horse, just certain areas, and I'll use plenty of water on my brush. If you find it easier, you can wet the specific area where the shadow will go. You'll see that I've kept enough moisture on the surface to create the shadow under the head. It's important not to mix warm and cool tones directly, as doing so might create a muddy green or greyish-green shade. Instead, allow them to alternate naturally for the best effect. Now, we definitely don't want green tones here. What we're aiming for are beautiful transitions between warm and cool shades. I'm using blue with a touch of black and mixing it with brown, like sienna, also with a hint of black. This way, the colours won't be too bright or stark. They'll look more muted and natural. Next, I move to the belly area. The horse I'm painting is a dappled white, so its belly will have those characteristic white spots on a darker background. I'll show you how to create that effect. I add a bit more black while the paint is still wet to even out the back and avoid harsh transitions. Now, I'll introduce more black while the back is still slightly wet. This is a good opportunity to darken the shadows. I switch to a smaller brush and start to add little dapple spots, lightly spreading the pigment. As the paint dries, these spots will become more visible. I then move to the legs and back again, focusing on the pronounced muscle here, which I highlight in blue. I'll darken these areas and add small accents as needed. I recommend not darkening everything at once. Leave some areas to refine later. This approach helps you avoid overworking the piece, so you can return with a clearer idea of where you want to add more colour. The mane and tail also have a play of warm and cool tones. The darkest part of the mane is at the roots, so pay attention to the direction of the hair. You don't need to draw every strand, just suggest the movement of the mane. The tail is in shadow at the bottom, with a lighter section at the top. Depending on your preference and the size of your paper, you can choose to add more or fewer individual strands. And there you have it, a beautiful horse. With steady, step-by-step work, you'll surely achieve great results. I'm confident you'll create many wonderful pieces, and I look forward to seeing you in the next masterclasses. See you soon, and goodbye.